You heard the quote, "You can be a girl and be a dog too." It is short, stylish, and built to trend, but the reason it exploded and then imploded is not the wording, it is the sequence. The week around it was a mess. The timing was unforgiving, and the locker room heard something very different from what the timeline celebrated. Here is the reality. Words land one way on social and another way inside a huddle. On social, that line sounds like permission to be unapologetically competitive and unapologetically feminine. Inside a huddle, it sounds like a promise that your composure will match your confidence. When the very next 48 hours are full of technical fouls, discipline, and walkbacks, the promise collapses. The message backfires not because people hate confidence, but because they can smell contradiction. Let me make this simple. Fans love edges, teammates love standards. Coaches love order. When a player brands herself as the trendsetter and the role model, the standard rises on every front. That is fair. That is the job. The standard is not about outfits, lashes, or logo deals. It is about where your fire flows when the game tilts. If the fire burns the opponents, you are a problem for the league. If the fire burns your own bench, you are a problem for your team. The spark that set this whole thing off was not just the quote itself, but everything orbiting it. There were comments that sounded like a public challenge to teammates. There was the next day softening of those comments. There was the suspension that arrived through the league's automatic rules. There was a benching that came from inside the team. And right on top of the turbulence, there was the shoe launch that sold out in minutes. The calendar looked like a highlight reel for the brand and a lowlight reel for the group. That contrast matters more than any single sentence. This is the part that the internet never explains well. Leadership is not proved by a speech, it is proved by sequence. The order of events tells the room who you are. If the order is talk hot, walk back, get suspended, and then celebrate a massive brand win, the room does not hear role model. The room hears we are secondary. It does not matter if the shoe launch was scheduled months in advance. People do not live in calendars, they live in feelings. The feeling was that the brand soared while the team stumbled. Now let us talk about the trendsetter title, because that word carries a tax. Calling yourself a trendsetter is not arrogant, it is accountability. It means your habits become templates for high school gyms and little kid camps. What you do under pressure becomes a lesson that parents repeat in the car ride home. If the visible pattern is public heat at teammates, a quick apology when backlash hits, texts that show up when the whistle is tough, and brand experiences that celebrate while the group is struggling, then the pattern teaches the wrong lesson. It tells the next generation to invest in noise and to outsource poise. That is not the legacy you want. There is a better way to wear the villain cloak. This league loves villains who rattle opponents. A villain who gets in the other team's head is valuable. That type of villain changes angles, steals possessions, and bends fourth quarters. The villain who rattles her own team is expensive. That type of villain drains timeouts, shrinks trust, and gives away momentum. One wins series, the other wins comments, and loses belief. If the identity is "I will be the villain if you need me to," make sure the villainy points outward. Technical fouls are not just heat checks, they are scoreboard leaks. They change substitution patterns, they alter the whistle, and they steal the rhythm that wins road games. A single tech in a close quarter is often the difference between a composed finish and a wild scramble. When the tally reaches the automatic threshold for suspension, the conversation changes. It stops being personality and starts being math. You are not available, someone else has to do your job. In a league where one run decides an entire series, that math is brutal. Chicago's context makes every syllable heavier. This is a team that has been searching for balance, for bench cohesion, and for a steady voice that sets the temperature. In a fragile build, one sharp comment lands like a shove. One eyes up glare becomes a headline for 3 days. One benching becomes a narrative that eats a week of practice. That is not because the media is unfair, it is because the structure is still wet cement. You do not stomp in wet cement and then ask why your footprint is permanent. Let me break the contradiction down into 3 parts. The first part is timing. The line landed during a flurry of discipline. The message promised control, and the outcomes announced the opposite. The second part is target. Public remarks that sound like a talent indictment always trigger private resentment. Even when you explain that your words were misread, people remember the bruise, not the bandage. The third part is trust. Trust is the quiet equity you earn by choosing the team's privacy over your own catharsis. When trust drops, people hear your confidence as self-promotion, not leadership. Some will say the backlash is unfair because the quote itself is positive. I agree that the quote is positive. I also believe fairness is not the point. The point is predictability. A franchise needs to know that the face of the team will be predictable under heat. That does not mean boring, it means reliable. The greats do not mute their personality, they sequence it. They make sure the basketball is the main event and the personality is the accent, not the other way around. They choose high-impact habits that do not require PR repair. What would the winning sequence have looked like here? It would have started with quiet, It would have continued with private standards and firm internal conversations. It would have delivered a week where the tech count dropped and the body language calmed. Then and only then, the girl and a dog line would have landed as proof, not performance. The shoe launch would still have sold out, but now it would have carried an aura of alignment. Fans would have linked the brand to the growth they saw on the floor. The locker room would have nodded, not rolled its eyes. There is another layer that is easy to miss. Young players and parents buy stories more than they buy stats. The story they want is not a slogan, it is a blueprint. They want to see how a star re-centers after a rough stretch. They want to watch a player turn fire into fuel without turning teammates into targets. They want to believe that modern charisma can live next to old school accountability. That is a powerful story. It is also the most profitable one over time. It sells jerseys now and respect forever. Let us walk through how leaders speak when the temperature spikes. They go first on responsibility and last on criticism. They say, I have to be better. They pause long enough for that to sink in. Then they say, we will be better. They promise we will handle this inside, and they keep that promise. They do not play chess with the press when their teammates are the pieces. They keep the conflict small and the growth visible. There's also the sponsor reality. Attention is great for launches, alignment is better for longevity. Brands want the face that raises the team while raising the trend. They want the highlight that pairs with the stat line, not a headache. If you steady the week, the halo around your product brightens. If the week is chaos, the halo dims even when the sales spike, because the story around the product sounds unstable. Long-term partners buy a narrative of growth and control, not just a moment of noise. Now, I know some will argue that the culture loves a bit of mess and that mess drives views. Yes, mess drives views, but champions do not survive on mess. They tolerate mess in microdoses and convert it into hunger. The teams that last leave the brand drama at the door and keep the basketball drama on the floor. The players who last figure out how to make the fourth quarter about execution, not expression. There is time for both, but they keep them in the right order. To close, I want to make one final point that keeps this honest without turning it into a personal attack. Personality is not the enemy here. Personality makes the W grow. Confidence is not the enemy either. Confidence sells tickets. The enemy is disorder. Disorder turns confidence into chaos. Disorder turns a good line into a bad week. The fix is not to get smaller. The fix is to get sequenced. The fire stays. The aim changes. When that shift happens, you will not need to say, I am the trendsetter. People will start saying it for you, and they will say it while pointing at wins, not just at headlines. That is why the girl in a dog speech backfired. Not because the idea was wrong, but because the order was wrong. Fix the order and the message becomes a weapon. Keep the order the same, and the message keeps hurting the people who have to play next to it. The choice is simple, even if the work is hard. Choose sequence, choose standards, choose the kind of villain that ruins an opponent's night and rebuilds your own room. If that becomes the story from here, the next time that line hits a camera, it will sound like leadership, not like a catchphrase.